Hi all, welcome back to my YouTube channel. So I'm finally getting around to the video that I've been talking about quite a lot, which is testing out the difference between my Windsor and Newton gouache and my Reeves gouache. Now the Reeves gouache is the cheaper of the two. It is more of a student grade gouache set and I got 24 tubes for £16, whereas the Windsor and Newton designer gouache is a higher quality artist grade gouache. The pricing will vary between £5 to £9 per bottle, and that reflects the series. So like a series 1 I believe is the more expensive because that's got the better light fastness and opacity for that paint. So if you're selling pieces, it's really important to pay attention to that, but for this sort of thing where it's sketchbook stuff, I wouldn't focus on it too much. Now, as you can see with the swatching here, I've tried using colours that are similar between the two sets. So I've got two Prussian blues, two cerulean blues, but it's where the greens and the purples come in that are quite a bit different. Simply because, so for example, my Reeves had a violet, whereas my Windsor and Newton, I actually had a brilliant violet. So that's why there's such a vast difference in colour. I have also taken the time to do a swatch of white onto black paper. Now, the main thing that I have noticed between the two different gouache sets is Reeves is a lot more transparent and a bit more streaky. I know the Windsor and Newton is looking streaky on the white, but it's not actually streaky. That was just where the paper had started to buckle from the water that I'd put onto it. I put a tiny bit too much water, so that's not to do with the actual Windsor and Newton paint. I just thought I'd put that out there. The Windsor and Newton paint is a lot richer in colour and a lot smoother to use. It has a bit more of a buttery feel to it, but I'll get into that when we get to that eye. For this, I have decided to do eyes to compare the two gouache sets, simply because I learnt from my previous video that I did where I was testing the difference between the different watercolour paper. I personally feel, and it was also pointed out to me, that my video was a little bit confusing, and I feel part of that was the way I did the voiceover, but also the image that I used to try and compare the two. It was just too small to give an accurate feel of how that paper worked. So I've decided by doing an eye, it's a lot larger, I can really experiment and show you how the colours layer together and how the finer details and things like that work. So for example, with this Reeves eye, you can see that the colours layer together quite well. Because they're so transparent, you can see each layer of colour coming through really easily. Now this is with me using minimal water. I will make that very clear with the Reeves gouache set. I don't actually mix much water and it's still very transparent. Even if I'm using gouache straight out the tube, which is what I did for the lashes, you'll notice it will still come out more transparent compared to the Windsor and Newton, which is what you'll see in a moment. So the white and the black I actually use straight out the tube just because I find I can't get that depth of colour. Whereas you'll see with the Windsor and Newton that I've now started on, it's already a lot darker in colour. Partly because of the differences in the colours that I've got, but also it's just a lot more opaque compared to the the Reeves gouache. So this is with me mixing quite a bit of water. Like I actually mixed a lot more water to try and get a similar transparency to the Reeves, and I was finding even with doing that, I still wasn't able to do that properly. So I would say for anyone that's a watercolourist looking to try gouache, maybe start off with a cheaper gouache because it's got that more transparent effect to it, similar to a watercolour, so you can layer up the colours a bit easier. Whereas the Windsor and Newton is kind of closer for me personally to the acrylic side because it's a lot darker and it's got a lot more depth to the colours. Now, a couple of things that I have noticed. So Windsor and Newton is a lot more saturated and pigmented, which is why it comes up a lot darker and a lot more opaque compared to the Reeves gouache set. However, when the gouache dries in the pan, because I have a palette that I close, it can start to crack and it can then start being a little bit bitty. So when you're trying to add water to it, it can make your paint a little bit bitty when you're trying to then apply that on to your paper that you're using. So that's something just to bear in mind. You might want to consider using a binder like honey or glycerin just to make that less noticeable in the terms of the bittiness of the colours. And also, if you do prefer that more transparent effect, I would definitely use more water. I didn't have to use any paint straight out the tube for any part of the eye when I'm using the Windsor and Newton gouache. So there's a big difference in opacity level, so please pay attention to that when you're using a piece. The Reeves is definitely, as I said, a lot more like watercolour. You can do washes of colour and also create glazing effects that I've actually used quite a few times. I didn't use it here, but I have used it in previous pieces. But it really doesn't work well for highlights. So as you can see, I did add the white, but you can barely see it on that eye, whereas compared to the Windsor and Newton, oh my gosh, I've just realised I totally forgot to add in more white, but even the white of the eye you can notice there. Anyway, this video is quite short. I hope you enjoyed it, but if there's things that I missed, please don't hesitate to let me know in the comments below.